Niti Namani. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachidesha Tarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna Hare Krishna
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Hare Rama Hare Rama Rama Rama. Good morning, devotees. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to share my screen. Second here. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Which chapter, Prabhu?
It is Canto 2, Chapter 7, Text 47. For some reason this sharing, here we go. Sorry about that.
It's 47.
Yeah.
I have the book here.
Okay. Can everybody see?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Narayanam Namaskritam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Udirajit Nasta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamashloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtuki. So this verse has actually 6 lines in it. Tomorrow's verse only 2. So let us chant all 6. Shashvat Shashvat Prashantam Abhayam Pratibodha Matram Shudham Samam Sat Ashtata Paramam Atmatatvam Shabdo Nayatra Purukarva Vakarvam Kriyarto Maya Par Aiti Abhimuke Chavilaj Amana Tadvai Padam Bhagavata Paramasya Pumso Brahmeti Yad Vidur Ajarisha Sukam Vishokam. We'll do it one more time, and then we'll see if anybody else would can chant. Shashva Prashantam Abhayam Pratibodha Matram Shudham Samam Sat Asata Paramatma Tattvam Shabdo Nayatra Parukara Karvam Priyarto Maya Paraiti Abhimuke Chavilajamana Tadvai Param Bhagavata Paramasya Pumso Brahmeti Yad Vidur Ajarsha Sukam Vishokam. Because it's long, I'll just do it 2 times. It's a long one, just for the sake of time. Anybody would like to chant?
Sure, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Shatvat prashantam abhayam pratibodha matram shuddham samam asatah paramatma tattvam sabdo nayatra पुरुकारकवान् क्रियार्थो माया परेति अभिमुखे च विलञ्जमाना तदवे पदं भगवतः परमस्य पुंसो ब्रह्मेति यद् विदुर अजस्त्र सुखं विशोकम्।
Jai.
Hare Krishna. Shat prasantam abhayam pratibodhamatram shuddham samam sad asat paramatma tattam sabdo na yatra purukarakabhan kiyartho maya pariyati abhimuke cha bhilajjamana तद्भय पदम भगवता परमस्य पुंसा ब्रह्मेति तयात् विदुर अजस्र सुखम भीशोकम। हरे कृष्ण।
Hare Krishna.
Sashwat Krishna. Go ahead, Prabhu. Sashwat prasantamabhayam pratibodhamatram suddham samam sadasat paramatma tattvam sabdho nayatra purukaraka van kriyarto maya paraiti abhimukhe cha vilajyamana तद्वै पदं भगवत् परमस्य पुंसो ब्रह्मेति यद्विदुर् अजस्र सुखं विशोकम्। हरे कृष्णा।
Anyone else?
Hare Krishna. Shashat prashantam प्रतिबद्धमात्रं शुद्धं समं सदसत् परमात्मा तत्तं शब्दो नयात पुरुकारकवन् क्रियातो माया परा इति अभिमुखे च विलज्जमाना तद्वै पदं भगवतो परमस्य पुंसा ब्रह्मेति यद्विदुरजस्र सुखं विशुकम्।
Very nice. Thank you all for chanting.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Synonyms: Shashvat, eternal. Prasantam, without disturbance. Abhayam, without fear. Pratibodha matram, a consciousness opposed to the material counterpart. Remember that pratibodha matram, it's going to come up in the purport. Shuddham, this also comes up in the purport, uncontaminated. Samam, without distinction. Sat astaha, of the cause and effect. Paramatma tattva, the principle of primeval cause. Shabda, speculative sound. Na, not. Yatra, where there is. Puru, kara, kavan, resulting in fruitive action. Kriya artaha, for the matter of sacrifice. Maya, illusion. Para aiti, flies away. Abhimuke, in front of. Cha, also. Vilajamana, being ashamed of. Tat, that. Vai, is certainly. Param, ultimate phase. Bhagavata, of the personality of Godhead. Param Asya, of the Supreme. Pumsaha, of the person. Brahma, the Absolute. Iti, thus. Yat, which. Vidhu, known as. Aja Shra, unlimited. Sukham, happiness. Dishokam, without grief. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. What is realized as the absolute Brahman is full of unlimited bliss without grief. That is certainly the ultimate phase of the Supreme Enjoyer, the personality of Godhead. He is eternally void of all disturbances and is fearless. He is complete consciousness as opposed to matter, uncontaminated and without distinctions. He is the principal primeval cause of all causes and effects, in whom there is no sacrifice for fruitive activities, and in whom the illusory energy does not stand. Purport is a very long purport, so I'm going to go paragraph by paragraph. I'm afraid if I read, it's going to take the majority of the time, and we may lose continuity in the conversation and attention. So please allow me to proceed with this format for today. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The Supreme Enjoyer, the personality of Godhead, is the Supreme Brahman, or the Summum Bonum, because of his being the supreme cause of all causes. The conception of impersonal Brahman realization is the first step, due to his distinction from the illusory conception of material existence. In other words, impersonal Brahman is a feature of the Absolute, distinct from material variegatedness, just as light is a conception distinct from its counterpart, darkness. But the light has its variegatedness, which is seen by those who further advance in the light. And thus the ultimate realization of Brahman is the source of Brahman light, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the summum bonum, or the ultimate source of everything. Therefore, meeting the personality of Godhead includes the realization of the impersonal Brahman as realized at first in contrast with material illusion. The personality of Godhead is the third step of Brahman realization. As explained in the first canto, one must understand all three features of the absolute Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Let's pause here for a moment. Srila Prabhupada is referring to this verse from the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1 to 11. Vadanti tatat vadat vidas tatvat yajjanam advayam brahma eti paramatmeti bhagavan iti subjate. That one who is learned in transcendental knowledge understands the absolute truth as the non-dual substance of Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. One who, and so as stated there, one who is truly learned understands these three features. And that the first step in realization is Brahman realization. And that is the distinction of spirit from matter and the qualities of differentiation. Srila Prabhupada mentions in this verse, and he gives in this purport, the comparison of light to darkness. It's the opposite. There's darkness and there's light. So light is the or you could say darkness is the absence of light, and then vice versa. So in the same way, Brahman, the impersonal, was considered to be the impersonal Brahman, it is the effulgence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But at the first level of realization, one is simply just trying to separate oneself from the material variegatedness or the material conception of life. When one goes a little bit further, and to the second step, one comes to Paramatma realization, or the realization of the super soul residing within one's heart. This will be explained a little bit later on in 2 paragraphs down. And then the third realization is that of Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source, or they say the summum bonum. This is an interesting word. It's derived from Latin, and it means the pinnacle, the ultimate. And that is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, from which all other things come. Srila Prabhupada says is to be considered the ultimate because it is the cause of all causes. In other words, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan, is the source of the other two. We also find reference here in the 14th chapter of the modes of material nature, and talks about this Brahman, that one who engages in devotional service, this is from text 26, one engages in full devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. Brahman is spiritual. It is the first platform or the first level of spiritual realization. It is not the end. Impersonalists, however, they see this as the goal or the end, the final step. And actually, they see these others, Paramatma and Bhagavan, as Maya, as distinction, and has no ultimate true spiritual value. That is difference in philosophical viewpoints between the impersonalistic philosophy and the Vaishnava philosophy. And we have to understand this because we want to understand truly who God is. I got a question. We get these questions, they get sent to the temple email. We got a question recently, and this is from a lady by the name of Sue. Listen to the question carefully. It says, "Good morning, I have a question. Can you worship Krishna and God at the same time? I hear one can, but I want to be sure. I'm very interested in joining. Thank you, and have a wonderful day." So her question is, can you worship Krishna and God at the same time? How would you answer that question? I mean, for a devotee, it's almost an obvious, what must she be thinking? But she's obviously seeing that there's a distinction between who Krishna is and who God is. And that's why it's important that we're very clear on this. How would you answer this question? Can you worship Krishna and God at the same time? I hear you can, but I want to make sure.
Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That Prabhupada always said. There is no difference between Krishna and God. Krishna is the God.
Yes. Yes. So she's thinking that Krishna and God are two different. So she's either thinking that Krishna is one of the many demigods. So can I worship demigods and Krishna at the same time? And to that answer, and to that question, the answer would be what?
Worship Krishna.
We worship Krishna. And you can't worship the demigods without worshiping Krishna, because Krishna tells us that, you know, when one who actually engages in demigod worship, they're actually worshiping me, but they're doing it in an indirect way, in the wrong way. But then the other thing she could be thinking of, that is, Krishna is a deity, but in the impersonalistic view, ultimately there's only Brahman. And these concepts of personality only exist in the material realm and don't exist in the ultimate realm. So in terms of God, it means as Brahman, can one actually worship Krishna and at the same time transcend to the ultimate goal of Brahman, of impersonal existence? So if that were the case, how would we answer it? I have to give her a complete answer, and I wanted your help.
He says all three are three features of the absolute. Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan.
Right. So she doesn't know so much, so I have to break it down for her in simple language. She's not a regular attendee of the Srimad Bhagavatam class, so we have to preach to her at her level. So the point is that ultimately Krishna is personal, that the Supreme Lord is personal, and from him all other attributes and aspects are manifest. The Brahman effulgence is the effulgence of the Supreme Lord. It's not independent in the same way that sunlight is not independent from the sun. But it is a feature, as well as the Paramatma is also a feature, the super soul within the heart. But the source of it is Lord Sri Krishna. Okay, let's continue. Pratibodha matram is just the opposite conception of material existence. In matter, there are material miseries. And thus, the first realization of Brahman, there is the negation of such material miseries. And there is the feeling of eternal existence, distinct from the pangs of birth and death, disease and old age. This is the primary conception of impersonal Brahman. And this sounds very nice. When one is suffering and they want to become free from their pain, the thought of becoming free from the pain, achieving peace, is very, very pleasing. I'm no longer suffering. The pain is so strong. The miseries are so great. Can you imagine a world without misery? Can you imagine waking up in the morning and not having to get into an argument with somebody? Can you imagine going through the day and not facing hunger or bodily pains, or looking on the TV and seeing that there are no fighting going on? No one is suffering around the world. Everybody is supplied with what they need to. They are free from misery. And in the 14th chapter, Krishna, this is what Krishna defines at the end of the chapter on the modes of material nature, after explaining of how the modes of material nature shackle the conditioned soul, you and me, in this material world. Arjuna asked, what is it like to become free from the modes of material nature? What happens at that time? And that's when Krishna, so I quoted it, one who engages in devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances. He transcends the modes of material nature and comes to the level of Brahman. And then he says, I am the basis of this Brahman, which is immortal, imperishable, and eternal, and is the constitutional position of ultimate happiness. So this spiritual Brahman level, Brahman state, as a state of unlimited peace and happiness. Becoming Brahman means, however, becoming qualitatively one and the same with Brahman. Qualitatively, not necessarily quantitatively. We are spiritual by nature. When one enters into Brahman, one does not actually lose his eternal Brahman identity, which is oftentimes thought in the philosophy of Mayavad. Now, to further understand this state of being, go to the 18th chapter, where Krishna says, Brahma Bhuta Pranasanatma Nasochati Nakanshati Tamasarveshu Bhuteshu Madbhaktim Labate Param. 1854. One who is transcendently situated at once realizes the supreme Brahman and becomes fully joyful. And at this age, Nasochati Nakanshati, he never laments or desires to have anything. He is equally disposed towards every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. So this Brahman state is very advanced. But for the devotee, it is not the final step. It is simply just being able to separate material existence, the miseries of material life, from spiritual realization, which one does not have the materials of material existence, but it begins to experience in the eternal existence of the soul. Let's continue. Any questions on that before moving on? Okay, we have a lot to cover. If so, at the end of each paragraph, we'll stop. The Supreme Lord is the supreme soul of everything, and therefore, in the supreme conception, affection is realized. The conception of affection is due to the relationship of soul to soul. The father is affectionate to his son because there is a relationship of nearness between the son and the father. But that sort of affection in the material world is full of limitations. When the personality of Godhead is met, the fullness of affection becomes manifested because of the reality of the affectionate relationship. He is not the object of affection by material tinges of body and mind, but he is full, naked, uncontaminated object of affection for all living entities, because he is the super soul, or the Paramatma, within everyone's heart. In this liberated state of affairs, the full-fledged affection for the Lord is awakened. This is Srila Prabhupada describing the second stage of transcendental realization, or Paramatma realization. And he's defining it as having relationship. In the Brahman realization, it is a sense of oneness. Here, there's this aspect of relationship between the soul and the super soul. And with the relationship develops an affection. And we call that the mood of service. The concept of affection is realized. In this material world, we have the concept of affection, but it's full of limitations. Those limitations are ultimately the source of the miseries that we experience here in this material world. The relationship is given between a father and one son. You see that the relationship between father and son, you may have seen a picture like this before. In the very beginning, the father is walking the son. He's pushing him in a stroller. And then later he's holding his hand as the son begins to walk. And the son becomes, grows up. And then later on in life, he's actually pushing the father in a wheelchair and holding the father's hand as he's walking with a walker and a cane. The relationships are full of limitations. And therefore, when we relate to relationships with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, oftentimes, if one just uses one's own mind to try to understand, they say, well, all relationships have defaults in them. All relationships either lead to an end, they lead to trouble, they lead to miseries. In fact, most of the problems we have in our life are due to our relationships. We do have trouble with our own mind. Our own mind does give us misery, adhyatmic. But this adhibodic relationships with other living entities provides us with so much trouble and misery. The relationship we can have, though, with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that relationship is not broken. That relationship, because he is the super soul, he is eternal. And when we connect with the super soul on the spiritual level, we can then begin to communicate and have a spiritual relationship. Therefore, the super soul is compared to the well-wishing friend of all living beings. And why is that? Because the super soul accompanies the living entity into this material world. The example of the two birds sitting in one tree. One bird is the super soul, the other bird is the conditioned soul, the living entity. The super soul is just the witness. He's looking upon us and traveling with us from one body to another body, just as the bird jumps from one tree to the next tree. Sometimes the bird is experiencing, and eating fruits that are berries that are bitter. Sometimes the berries are sweet. But the cycle of enjoying and suffering goes on from tree to tree as the bird jumps and flies away from tree to another tree. The super soul just accompanies and allows and witnesses and actually arranges for all of this to happen. But at one point, the soul then turns and says, I'm doing the same thing. The one bird that represents the conditioned soul says, I'm doing the same thing over and over again, jumping from tree to tree. Sometimes I think I'm enjoying and having sweet berries, and sometimes I'm suffering because the berries are sour, but this keeps happening over and over again. There must be something greater. So he turns to the other bird and begins to ask him questions, begins to pray for answers. Isn't there something more than this? So when we first turn to God, we're turning to the super soul. We're asking for direction. He's our well-wishing friend. And at that point, the super soul arranges for us to come in contact with devotees. the supersoul arranges for the spiritual master and becomes that external manifestation of the supersoul. So the supersoul is at the stage where one actually begins a relationship with the Lord. The second stage of realization. Any questions or comments before moving on? Okay.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I have a question. Whether
Yes, Mr. Mukul.
super soul has any effect on the karma of the living entity, or it is the karma is the free will of the living entity?
What was the last part? The karma is the...
Free will of the living entity.
Yeah. Krishna, he tells us in the Bhagavad Gita that he is not responsible for anyone's karma. That is based on the free will of the living entity and the choices that they undergo trying to enjoy and manipulate or lord over the material world. The supersoul gives the freedom for one to act and for one to choose. And in that way, he remains neutral to all. However, when one turns to the supersoul, then that relationship takes place. And then Krishna says, to that person, he takes special care and begins to actually free one from the karma when one fully surrenders to the supersoul.
Okay, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Is that clear?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yeah. But the supersoul is not responsible for the living entity to act in a particular way. I'm trying to think of the verse in the Bhagavad Gita. Does anybody remember the verses in the Bhagavad Gita that talk about this? I believe it's in the 6th chapter. Okay. As such, there are unlimited flow of everlasting happiness. Without fear of its being broken, we have experienced here in this material world. The relationship with the Lord is never broken. Thus, there is no grief and no fear. Such happiness is inexplicable by words. This is very beautiful. And there can be no attempt to generate such happiness by fruit of activities, by arrangements and sacrifices. But we must also know that happiness, unbroken happiness, exchanged with the Supreme Person, the personality of Godhead, as described in this verse, transcends the impersonal conception of the Upanishads. In the Upanishads, the description is more or less negation of the material conception of things. But this is not denial of the transcendental senses of the Supreme Lord. Herein also, the same is affirmed in the statement that the Supreme Lord is pure, Shuddham. The word Shuddham indicates that the senses of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are not made of material elements. They are transcendental, free from all contamination of material identification. And also, the liberated souls are not devoid of senses. Otherwise, there cannot be any reciprocation of unhampered spiritual happiness, exchanged between them in spontaneous, unbroken joy. All the senses, both the Lord and of the devotees, are without material contamination. They are so because they are beyond the material cause and effects, as clearly mentioned herein, Sat Akshakta Param. The illusory material energy cannot work there, being ashamed before the Lord and his transcendental devotees. In the material world, the sense activities are not without grief. But here it is clearly said that the senses of the Lord and the devotees are without any grief. There is a distinct difference between the material and spiritual senses, and one should understand it without denying the spiritual senses because of a material conception. So Srila Prabhupada's driving home the point very nicely. Each one of these sentences one could elaborate on and open up, starting with this last one. And one should understand it without denying spiritual senses because of the material conception. The platform of impersonal realization is often understood through the study of the Upanishads. The study of the Upanishads give information, but it has to be really thought through. There's verses that state things such as, I am that. And one has to try to understand, well, what is I and what is that? And then so we find that this can be, unless one has a high level of spiritual understanding, it can become very confusing. And there can be many interpretations of what that is. Lord Chaitanya, when he met with the Mayavadi sannyasis in Benares, they saw him and asked him, you are a sannyasi, and the duty of a sannyasi is to read Vedanta. And when they say Vedanta, they mean the Upanishads. To study the Upanishads and discuss the topics. Lord Chaitanya's answer was, my spiritual master considered me to be a fool and unable to comprehend the topics of the Upanishads. And therefore he told me, simply just chant the holy names of Krishna. I'm sorry, I got a call and it interrupted this. I don't, can everybody still hear me?
Yes,
Yeah. Okay, you're good. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but we're seeing a different screen. You're sharing screen. You have to stop.
Yeah, just everything kind of came up. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. Stop sharing. I'm on my computer and it somehow somebody called me on and it interrupted this. But anyway, he mentions Lord, so his spiritual master Ishwara Puri, Lord Chaitanya is explained to these Mayavadi sannyasis. He says that he considered me to be a fool and only to chant the holy names of Krishna. And in doing so, he was explaining to them that one will actually not understand who the Supreme Personality of Godhead is through one's own personal mind, trying to understand. It is only by the grace of the Lord that one can actually understand the Lord. And then he began to preach to them. And he explained, Harinama, 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 Eva Kevalam, Kalona Stevana, Stevana, Stevanam, Gatiranyata. That by reawakening one's relationship with Krishna, and that can be done by chanting the holy names of Krishna and engaging in transcendental loving service to Krishna, this affection and joy awakens within one's heart. And this can be practically understood and realized. And then he explains the comparison of that to Brahman realization is very insignificant. Brahman realization becomes very small and insignificant in comparison to the joy, the eternal joy that one experiences in one's eternal relationship with Krishna. And he calls it then the fifth stage of spiritual realization. Because usually the fourth stage is liberation, is just impersonal liberation. But a relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, in that relationship means that there are at least two individuals and they're serving. So the idea that there's impersonalism, that everything is one, there's a oneness in the aspect of service. Oneness in the aspect of we are related to Krishna, that there's no separation between us, but not oneness in quantitative identity, as if there's only one being. There are many beings, but we're all Brahman or spiritual. And in that spiritual relationship, there's unlimited joy to be had. And that is the point here, that relationship is ours. Because of our attraction and unwilling to give up the material energy, we're unable to experience this relationship. And that is the defect that we have to overcome. We still believe that we can have Krishna and have this and experience this everlasting, joyful relationship that is eternally there. But we feel we can experience it by enjoying in this material world at the same time. And therefore, we want them both. And therefore, we're trying to make processes of sacrifices or material arrangements, so that we can have unlimited happiness in this world. It only brings frustration to us. However, Krishna says we have to transform our material desires into spiritual desires. We do that by utilizing our bodies and minds and dovetailing them into Krishna's service. The relationships of this world are broken. Broken because there are many desires that will be unfulfilled. There are many conflicting desires. Expectations that we set for each other that always become unfulfilled. In the spiritual sense, when it says there's no miseries, there's only peacefulness. Krishna can fulfill all desires. But these aren't material desires that are going to be broken at the time of death or arranged due to the modes of material nature. So Krishna is inviting us in to this relationship with him. And we can progress in this relationship by making our attempt to serve Krishna in our lives every single day. From the moment we wake up, chanting the holy name, Krishna's holy names, thinking about Krishna, hearing about Krishna, asking Krishna, praying to Krishna to please help us overcome our material attachments, our material desires. Krishna, I really want you. I want a relationship with you. Please help me achieve this relationship. Please give me, and how is that relationship understood? I am your Das. Das Das Anudas. Please engage me in your service. And then we open ourselves up to be engaged in Krishna's service. And when Krishna gives us that service, we embrace it with joy and we dedicate ourselves to it. And we absorb our minds in thinking of Krishna while we perform his service, or perform service to him. There's one last paragraph here. Let me read it, and then we'll end for today. The senses of the material world are surcharged with material ignorance. In every way, the authorities have recommended purification of the senses from the material conception. In the material world, the senses are manipulated for individual and personal satisfaction, whereas in the spiritual world, the senses are properly used for the purpose for which they are originally meant, namely satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Such sensual activities are natural, and therefore sense gratification there is uninterrupted and unbroken by material contamination, because the senses are spiritually purified. And such satisfaction of the senses is equally shared by the transcendental reciprocators. Since the activities are unlimited and constantly increasing, there is no scope for material attempts or artificial arrangements. Such happiness of transcendental quality is called Brahmasokyam, which is clearly described in the 5th canto. Okay, any questions or comments? Any realizations from these verses?
Purification of the senses are very important, I think. All the time we have to be careful about our senses. So that's what I thought so here.
Yeah. So the purification of the senses, the example given oftentimes is that of snakes and being able to charm, become like a snake charmer. Or when the snakes become defanged, you take away the fangs of the snake. They no longer become dangerous. No one would be afraid of a snake if the snake couldn't bite you. So the process of charming the snakes or defanging the snakes is taking away the danger that is there. The trouble with the senses is that they become attracted to material pleasures. And those material pleasures redirect the desires of the living entity. They think, in this material world, I can find lasting peace. I can find relationships that will ultimately satisfy me. But when it's become separated from Krishna, it takes on the material qualities. Dukalayam shashvatam, temporary and full of misery. When the senses are used in Krishna's service, then they're rightly placed. Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhaktiruttama. By engaging the senses in the master of the senses, one becomes purified and engages in devotional service. So therefore, we need to immerse our lives in finding ways to serve and connect ourselves with the Supreme Lord. There's no other way. And that's what Krishna, our Srila Prabhupada, is saying here. There's no, he says at the end, such senses equally shared, because in the previous paragraph, he talks about the artificial the illusory material energy cannot work here. No, that wasn't it. Sorry, I lost where I was here. But he explains that, by engaging in, material acts of sacrifice or trying to pursue material sense gratification, the relationship with Krishna then becomes we don't understand that and becomes broken. Anyway, we can stop here if there's any questions. I know we're coming up upon the hour. It was a very long purport, but very full with a lot of spiritual understanding, so that we can understand our relationship with the Supreme Lord.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I have a question.
Please,
So
Mataji.
how can we stop desiring for material things when we are living in this material world, and we need many things also that is not related to Krishna?
Mm-hmm. Well, the thing is, we have to see how it is. We can see it in different ways. One, we can see it as Krishna because Krishna is supplying it. The problem comes when we see things separated from Krishna. So one level of realization or understanding is seeing things that everything is Krishna. You buy food at the store, that food is Krishna's energy. Right? This is Krishna. This is a byproduct of Krishna's energy. Now, the next step of realization is, if I understand this is Krishna's energy, how can I use this in Krishna's service? Let me make something and offer it to him. Let me engage in some service. I am your das. I am your servant. You're supplying everything. Let me at least offer it back to you. If you have an orange, right? And if I put an orange before you, and you say, this is an orange. I say, where's the orange? You'll say, this is the orange. Now, if you take the skin of that orange and you peel it and you put it aside, and I say, where is the orange? You'll point to the fruit. And I'll say, what is the peel to the side? You'll say, that is trash. Now, a moment before you pointed to the peel and you said, this is the orange. Because you saw that the peel is connected to the orange itself, and therefore it was the orange. But when you take the peel away and you throw it away, you think that this is trash because it's no longer connected to the orange. So in the same way, when we see everything connected with Krishna, it becomes spiritual. When we see things disconnected from Krishna, then it becomes material. So in that way, we can see everything that we do has some connection with Krishna. How can we not see Krishna? If we understand that this material energy is part of is Krishna's energy. And when we're able to see the material energy in that way, this is I'm glad that you brought this point up, because in the purport it says the material energy in front of Krishna actually stands down. It actually becomes our friend. It actually becomes our aid in serving Krishna. But when we think and see it separately from Krishna, when we see things only by as our, for our own enjoyment, then we see that there's a distinction between Krishna and Krishna's energy.
It's really nice, Prabhu. Sometimes we like, especially myself, like I cry for something to Krishna, like then when I got it, then I forgot about Krishna. Then sometime later I will remember, oh, I asked that when a long time ago to Krishna. Then I just go in front of him, thanks him sometime. But like generally, people are like, even they desire for something and they got it, they will forget to thanks God and relate to God. That is also there. Sometimes I also forgot, to thanks
Can
Krishna.
I ask something? Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we have to always thank God. Our way of thanking God is we ask Krishna to please give us devotional service. Thank you, Krishna, for supplying. Let me take what I need. Don't let me take more than what I need. That is one way that we honor Krishna's, the way we take care of Krishna's energy. And the other way is to engage it in Krishna's service, and help serve the Supreme Lord and others with it.
The example you given, Prabhu, is really nice. The orange one. Thank you so much.
Jai Shri Prabhupada.
Jai Shri.
Hare
Yeah,
Krishna.
Prabhu, I just want to ask, some people say, Krishna is giving all these things. What is the point of giving him back? See, we say that, whatever you have, you offer to him. But sometimes, and some slokas says, patram pushpam phalam toyam. He doesn't want any. But at the same time, whatever we have to give. That's what the usual normal people say. That some people say, he is giving everything. What is that I have to offer to him? He is the one who is giving everything. So where is the answer for that?
So Krishna, he supplies, but he doesn't have to supply, right?
Yeah.
Everything is dependent upon Krishna, right?
Yeah.
So, the point is we have to be of gratitude. We have to understand that everything is coming from some source. And Krishna is the source of all. And it manifests in different ways. We can give thanks to the farmer. We can give thanks to the earth. We can give thanks to the trucker who brings the truck in. We can give thanks to the storekeeper. We can give thanks to all these people because they're all playing a part. But ultimately, we see Krishna. And this is Krishna. The material energy is being arranged so expertly by Krishna. But the process of devotion, even more importantly in this, is that from the material point of view, your question from the material point of view is that we have to have gratitude. And we should live in a sense of gratitude. For the devotee is trying to develop a relationship with Krishna. And therefore, they're always thinking, how can I please Krishna? How can I serve Krishna? So that when we take objects and give them to Krishna with the mood of loving devotion, wanting to serve him, that is bhakti. And that's actually what pleases Krishna the most. He wants to see that we're thinking about him and not ourselves. When we're thinking about him, we're in our rightful place. When we're thinking about ourselves, we're in our unnatural state. In that unnatural state, Krishna is sad because he knows we're suffering.
Okay.
That is why. So gratitude at the basic level, we should always have gratitude and give thanks to what we have. And the way of giving thanks is by offering it back and utilizing it for good. But the ultimate sense is that we want to revive our lost relationship with Krishna. Whatever we have, we want to use in his service. Okay. Hare Krishna. All glories
Hare
to
Krishna.
God.
Yeah.
Jai.
Panchakalpatarubhyascha kripas patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namah.
Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Santaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki.